Welcome back. As we continue the topic that we were talking about before, which was what's happening from 2 to 3 and a little beyond that with our children. We had just mentioned that language differences become pretty obvious when children begin to learn the syntax of their language, that is the small grammatical bits and how everything goes together. Children who are delayed seem to have ongoing delays in that area. Children who are learning languages that have different structures and different sentence structures will learn the structure of their own language. There's another area that we're very interested in looking at children's language this age, and it is the pragmatics of their language, or what they are using the language to do. There have been a number of studies of this that have shown that the pragmatics is really pretty similar in the beginnings. Children are looking at how they can share attention, what they are doing, expressing their needs, expressing their emotions. These all come across even when language is just barely emerging. However, by about the age of 3, there have been a number of studies. I conducted one with children who were learning signs. Joanna Nicholas conducted one with children who were learning only spoken language. A research team in Colorado has been conducting studies with a large number of children who are using varied approaches to language. And we find that while the basic pragmatics are the same, differences begin to occur. One of them is that the children who are delayed in their language make fewer attempts to actually repair misunderstandings. Now, this seems counterintuitive, and yet there have been studies of college students who were deaf or hard of hearing and had some language delays at that age. They have gotten a similar kind of finding, so that instead of increasing attempts to make sure that everything is understood, they've been less likely to use this particular function of language. This, of course, is something that can kind of limit the degree to which you can make up those misunderstandings and delays. Another thing we've seen with our 3-year-olds across the board is if language is delayed, there's less use of what we call, in fancy terms, the heuristic function. This is using language to learn. But what you're looking for in a 3-year-old is the question why. I was actually listening. I live in an apartment building now, and I can hear people around me sometimes. And my neighbor was out on their balcony, and something happened, some kind of ruckus upstairs. There are 2 little girls, and the daddy yelled at one of them to stop that. The one he didn't yell at actually thought he'd yelled at her. And so she went to him and she said, "Daddy, mad at me?" And he said, "No, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at your sister." To which she said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, she was pushing you." The little girl said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I was afraid she was going to hurt you." "Why?" "Well, she's bigger than you are." "Why?" "This is a good daddy." He said, "Let's all go for a walk." And everybody ran and grabbed their coats, and this conversation was ended. But this repeated why is something that's very common at the age of 3, 3.5, when children's language is developing on time. This is something that we find missing when language is delayed. That little why doesn't seem to happen nearly as early as it does for other children. And so that's a signal that there is less information, if you will, being asked for, and less learning that's being sort of demanded from children when they're delayed in this. This actually can have long-lasting effects. Now, while we've talked again about these delays, let's change our focus back to where we started. We're talking about literacy skills. Why do we care about why? Why do we care about secure attachment? Why do we care about using symbols in play? Why do we care about having motor skills to explore more? Because all of these inputs come together so that children begin to learn that print actually is just another way of communicating. When you write something, you're trying to send a message to someone. When you read something, you're trying to understand that message that's being sent. What's the best way to start toward literacy? Well, what we call shared reading, parents reading to children from early on. Any number of studies have shown universally, whether children are learning Chinese or they're learning English or they're learning American Sign Language, early reading is of great assistance to their own developing literacy. They learn about the functions of language from being read to. Not only do you learn that print is communicating something, but children start to learn about books, book handling, that you turn the pages, that you see something different. They are practicing with symbols, even if those symbols are pictures. This is giving them more practice with the idea that you look, something inside you knows what that is, and you can relate it to what's happening on that page. There's more opportunity for memory exercises. We all know how children just love to have the same book read to them again and again and again. And eventually they may start reading it to you, even if what they're doing is simply turning the pages and pointing out a picture. This also helps them to practice learning what a story is and how stories move along. But what's important is that it often is a pleasurable experience. In fact, if it's not pleasurable, you kind of want to put it aside and come back later. But this leads to a desire to be read to, a desire to read, a desire to write, and pride in your abilities. I have a grandchild who just turned 4 years old, and he proudly told me that his daddy brought him a new book and that he had read it himself. He had read every page. This surprised me because I've seen no evidence that this child could actually read. And his father told me that he had found this magnificent book. The name of it was Ball. And inside of the book, on every page, there was a picture of a different kind of ball, a basketball, a football, a tennis ball, and so forth. And there was one word on every page, and that word was ball. It was written in different colors. It was written in different print. And what my grandchild had been able to do after the first several pages was identify that that was the same word. Looking at the pictures, he knew it was ball. What was important about it was that he was so proud of himself. He himself had this image. He had read this whole book. I actually think that it would be great to make these books ourselves, especially since we can print images very easily in most places now. Select something that's important to the child, make different images because you're working on categories, put the same word on it to help them realize that they actually can decode. What he was learning to do was decode one word. Look at the print, be able to say it, know what it means. I believe that it's probably more important, as important as shared reading is with all children. When you have a child who has some language delay, or you have a child who is not able to hear everything going on around them, print may become a particularly important assistance to them. And so instead of decreasing reading to children who have some limited hearing, I think it's more important to increase it. However, there may be a couple of challenges to doing this. One thing that's noticeable is that you may need to slow down. This child is going to have to look at what's in the book. They're probably going to want to look up at your face, see your facial expression. They may be looking at your face so they get some visual cues to the words that you're saying and pronouncing. And you have to make sure you give them time for this. So just as way back in an earlier lecture, we said it's important sometimes in communication to just sit there and wait for the child. And in this case, slowing down can be a good thing rather than a negative thing. If you see the picture, the two pictures that are on this page, I want to tell you that's a hearing child. I hesitated before I used pictures of a hearing child, but I thought it made my point pretty well. That child too is looking down at the book, but even though it's pretty clear that she can hear me, she's looking up at me. She wants to see what emotion is on my face. She wants to watch as I'm saying those words. The point I would like to make with this is that when we slow down with a child to sort of accommodate the fact that he's not hearing well, we're not trying to learn a whole new behavior. We're simply being more aware of behaviors that you would use with any child. Children tend to look at the face of a reader. You want also that face-to-face because it keeps engagement going. So if the child wants to keep looking at the book, that's fine, but if the child looks up, consider this a positive bid to make sure that you are engaged, that he is engaged in the same thing. This is almost like the social referencing or the checking up with the parent we saw way back when we were talking about mastery motivation. Here's another little clue. Please don't try to read the book word for word. Please don't try to make sure you've finished every word on the page before the child turns the page. It's a good idea in the beginning, paraphrase the book, don't have to attract to the words. After a while, the child will become interested in them, and you'll be able to do this, and they will in fact want you to do it. But until the child shows you they're ready, it's better to use it as a conversation tool than to try to actually make them sit still and listen to you read. Because remember, the idea is that this is supposed to be fun, and this is supposed to get them where they're going to want to read. Okay, let's do a little review here before we finish up. Our job in this set of lectures was to look at development from birth up to the age where children are about ready to start preschool. We were aiming in these lectures to lay out what's necessary to give a child a good foundation for later learning. Actually, if you're interested in learning more details about this age range, my colleague Lynn Kester and I recently published a book called Nurturing Language and Learning, the Development of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Infants and Toddlers. And so you can get a lot more information, plus developmental charts that show expectations at different age levels from that particular book. So I hope you'll be interested in this topic as I am, and that might be a good resource for you, although there are others also. So let's take a look now and review what it is that we started out to do. We wanted to make sure that we're putting in place the necessary foundations for the child later getting into literacy skills, the decoding, the general understanding. One of the things we want to make sure is that we're giving children varied experiences so that they develop the background knowledge that's going to help them make sense of what they read. Another thing we've wanted to do is make sure that they become facile, they become very good at manipulating symbols, that they know that print, for example, means something. A word means something, they can relate this together. If they can relate the sounds of a word to the print letters, that's even a bigger advantage because that is something that a lot of children find very helpful in learning to decode words. This is something that can be worked on in a structured way later on, but during these first years we're wanting to stick to naturally occurring supports so that we use repetition, we use a lot of responsiveness to what the child is looking at, thinking about, and trying to communicate about, and we're building those skills in that way. We may also need later on to develop specific lessons, hopefully fun ones, to help children learn to recognize those little bits of English grammar. But we need to keep in mind that even hearing children aren't doing this in any reliable fashion by 3.5 years. So we need to have high expectations for children with limited hearing, but we don't need to try to skip over steps and take them even farther than we would expect them to be otherwise. In fact, that's an important concept there, is not to try to skip. The whole idea behind development, which we've been using in this series of lectures to mean sort of naturally occurring from interactions with the environment, is that things happen step by step. When we try to skip a step, That is, one of those bricks was missing from the foundation, but we just charged ahead and built on top of it anyway. We're not going to have a strong skill develop. In fact, we can expect more and more delay to occur. Early, positive, interactive experiences plus increased access, whether it's through additional vision, whether it's through boosting the hearing signal that can come in, is necessary. If the child can't access what is being said to them, it's not going to be part of what they uptake, and that is then going to weaken the foundation as they get into looking at print and trying to get meaning out of that. Here are some things we know. Increasing the uptake increases language development. Responsive social and communicative interactions also enhance language development, but as well cognition. And if a child has a language delay, or if they're having problems processing some of what they're hearing, keep in mind they're going to have to use the cognitive part more to fill in those gaps. And so it's very important that we make sure that they're getting lots of experiences interacting with objects, solving little problems, and learning how things work. They need lots of hands-on experiences. When you take these underlying abilities and you combine them with pre-literacy activities, lots of scribbling, lots of scribbling back, lots of looking at pictures, lots of shared reading, lots of time alone to do whatever they want with that book, you put those together and we can say, well, all right, we've tracked our child over 3 or so years, we've given them these foundations, it is now time for the next step to occur. And they start to apply all these things to the next activities they will have, which will be more preschool-like. And they will be able to then make the kind of progress that we are hoping for all our children. At this point, I'd love to say that a child with limited hearing, who is deaf or hard of hearing, actually starts out on the playing field that's level with those who are hearing. That's not the case yet. But as we continue to work on this, we continue to focus on these early foundations, we can hope to level out that field. I think that we have the potential to do that. We've seen enormous progress over the last few decades. We think that our children are going to continue to make even more progress in the future. Thank you so much for attending to and listening to these lectures. I'm so very happy to be able to communicate with you these things. Best of luck with what you're doing.